So just a very quick intro to say that I became a feminist when I became a mother. I think that's what happens to a lot of women, because up to that point, if you have certain privileges, you can sort of try to pretend that sexism doesn't impact you that much. And then when you have children, I think it hits you in the face that being a woman is very, very different from being a man, and that your place in the world is a very different one. So my oldest is a boy, he has 14 now, so I think that I always thought of myself as a feminist, but that's when I really started studying and getting involved. But then about gender ideology, it came a bit later. It was in 2017. I had never thought that much about that issue, and I come from a very leftist family. My parents do theater, so I grew up in that scene. Always, I was born around gays and lesbians and everything. So to me it was very shocking. The first time that I started hearing in Brazil, trans women are women, and I just very naturally said, no, they're not. And I didn't mean anything by it. I just think, no, they're not. And then all my friends, also from the left, who used to agree with me on other issues, they reacted so strongly, so violently, that I was like, I don't know what's going on here. Either I'm going crazy, because to me this is obvious, or there's something I don't understand here. And that's when I started researching, and I fell into a rabbit hole, and I haven't gotten out of it up to today. And so I researched a lot, I read a lot. I started first following it here in Turf Island, because there wasn't much going on in Brazil about this. And then I volunteered for almost 2 years for WDI, helping them organize their weekly webinars. So I met a lot of women talking about this and heard about what was going on in the world. And then I thought it was time to do something practical in Brazil. And so I'm in MATRIA since the beginning. We are a women's association, and I think that our format is very special, and it's what's been a success for us is we are legally constituted, and as an association, meaning that women join and pay a small monthly fee, and that's how we finance ourselves. So we are self-funded, and I think that's really good and really important. We wouldn't get any funds like in Brazil anyway, but that's what gave us freedom to more and more pay lawyers to take cases, and either to the Supreme Court or defending women who are being attacked. MATRIA has existed for 2 years, and we are growing a lot and having an impact, even though we're very, very far from success, let's say. We are around 215 women right now in almost all the states of Brazil. Everything's online because Brazil is so big. It's very hard for us to meet, but we have been doing a few national meetings. Not everyone can go, not everyone has the money, but it's nice when we get to meet. We also have Brazilian women in 8 other countries who also participate, and in Brazil we have a Twitter mostly to talk to international audience, so we tweet things in English. And I think everyone here is very familiar with the basic trans thing, right? So I don't have to explain the issues. Okay, so I'm going to focus more on how it is in Brazil. I think there are a few differences. Things are a bit different there. But I thought it was curious that at least 4 people here commented since I got here 3 days ago. But how come Brazil is so Catholic, so conservative? How come this has become so big in Brazil? And I don't really see a contradiction, because I think that Brazil is so patriarchal that to me it makes sense that such a masculinist thing would take hold there. And at the same time, Brazil is very contradictory in other senses, because it is a very religious country, getting more and more evangelical, from Catholic to evangelical. But also, if you think about it, we have Carnival where everyone's naked on the street, you know, and we have like the hugest LGBT pride parades, and so I think everything fits there nicely. And we are very culturally colonized, especially by the United States. It's almost like a dumping place for all the American ideas. So to me, it's quite obvious that such a crazy idea that was mostly born there would be exported to Brazil. And I also think that the more this is dying in the global north, let's say, the more it will get bigger in Brazil and maybe other places, because I think it's a market thing. I think they need markets to keep open, and so they're going to push it harder and harder in other places. And Brazil is a huge market, and we have, for example, a public health system like here. So getting our huge public health system to do puberty blockers and surgeries and everything is a super win. And it's happening. I'm going to talk about the fights around this. We have a great thinker in Brazil who says that Brazil is where bad ideas go to die. I think that's pretty much what's going to happen, that this will maybe agonize there for still quite a while after it's dead here, but we'll see. We're fighting hard to sort of kill it faster. There's also a cultural thing that in Brazil we already had, I can't say always, I don't know, but certainly since before I was born, this figure called travesti. And travesti in Brazil meant something very specific. It was usually a gay man, poor man, a lot of times black man, who had probably been kicked out of his home for being gay or something, ended up in prostitution. And in prostitution, the market is bigger if you are a travesti, meaning feminized himself, sometimes breasts, everything done in a very dangerous way of injecting industrial silicone and things like that. The public phone booths don't really exist anymore, but in Brazil it used to be that if you went into one of those, you would see all the posters for those, like she-male, for the travestis, with the big dick and the big boobs. And so this was very known to everyone in Brazil. But it was very clear that travesti was a man. And we are a gendered language, and we used to say o travesti, like o meaning the masculine form. Even now has changed. That has changed. They now say it's a travesti, like in the female form, as if it's now a female identity. But the fact that this figure existed has, I think, impacted a lot of things in Brazil. First of all, because this is indeed a vulnerable group. Even though it is a violent group, even inside the prostitution, for example, they will be very violent to women in prostitution to gain like the street and things like that. But they are a vulnerable group. So this idea got extended to trans are vulnerable. But those who say they are trans in Brazil, just like here, they're not a vulnerable group. It's like young kids who paint their hair blue, say they're non-binary in university, and that's it. But suddenly, everyone gained this status of most vulnerable ever because of the travestis. And this has even gained the entire world. And I don't know if you've heard this, but there are a lot of lies that originated in Brazil. If you've heard the story that the life expectancy of trans people is 35 years old, this was totally made up by our one of Brazil's trans groups called ANTRA, who just spuns the craziest lies in what they pretend are serious annual reports. Same things go for Brazil is the country that kills most trans in the world. That has no basis at all. MATRIA, my group, has worked on that, on debunking all that. But so Brazil has this narrative that exists everywhere is the strongest in Brazil, with that idea that it's where we kill most trans people in the world. 90% of trans people are in prostitution, they say. It makes no sense whatsoever. The few studies that do exist do not show that. And this trans movement, with its current face, does absolutely nothing for those who are in prostitution. They are two completely separate things. In Brazil, none of it came through laws. Like in a lot of places, it's sort of a playbook on how to do things. It all came through back doors, we have a very active Supreme Court in Brazil that decided to champion all that. And so our Supreme Court is the one who decided on a lot of things. So there was never a public debate, because here there was a debate on, are we going to change the rules for the gender recognition certificate, for example. In Brazil, the Supreme Court just decided on self-ID, total and complete self-ID. And so anyone can just go to a notary and change their sex and name just like that. But in the end, it's not even necessary to change anything, because even if you don't change your documents, the government has changed all the health public system, universities, everything, where they have to accept what we call in Brazil your social name. Meaning it can be a different name from what's on your document. It doesn't matter. You have a name and your sex in your document. You don't need to change it. If you go to a hospital, you say, no, my social name is another one, and I want to be treated as a woman, and that's it. Same thing for prisons. A man can just not even change the document and still ask to go to female prison and everything. So it's complete chaos, as you can imagine, because we can't even say, like you can hear, how many GRCs there are, or how many. People are self-declaring without changing documents, and so the statistics are all gone crazy. So this was in 2018 that the Supreme Court in Brazil decided that. They have another decision that is terrible and that we've been trying to fight against, is that they have decided that as long as Congress and Senate do not pass a law criminalizing what they called homo-transphobia, as if it's one thing, then this homo-transphobia should be equated to the crime of racism, because it's a sort of social racism. Makes no sense, but and racism in Brazil, it's a very serious offense, because we had 400 years of slavery. It's a very racist country, and so the law became harsher and harsher. It's the sort of crime, I don't know if I know the word in English, but it never, even if you decide 15 years later to accuse someone of it, it hasn't expired. I don't know what's the word for it. Prescribed, yes. So it's all very strange, because according to our Constitution, the Supreme Court cannot create a law. That's for legislators to do. And our Penal Code, the first article says there is no crime that hasn't been defined prior, that isn't here in the Penal Code, that doesn't exist. No one can be accused of a crime that doesn't exist here in the Penal Code. But now we have people, and especially women, being criminally prosecuted for homo-transphobia, for racism, for a crime that doesn't really exist. And this has been terrible, because we end up with situations where a black woman is criminally prosecuted for racism because a white man in a dress accused her of homo-transphobia. And it's a criminal offense, meaning jail time. You can go to jail because of that. It's not just a civil thing. I don't know if it works like that here, but in Brazil, it's like criminal and civil offenses. Like the civil ones are mostly you're going to pay a fine or something like that. So one of the things MATRIA does the most ends up being helping women who come to us in the most different situations accused of transphobia. In universities, it's very strong, just like here, where there were professors who were persecuted, students, but then we also have women criminally charged. One example that we are awaiting for the results of the judgment, we don't know why it's taken so long because it happened in April, is a very humble cleaning lady from the north of Brazil. She's a mother, and she had worked for 8 years as a cleaning lady in a public university, and one day she was in the female bathroom and a man came in. And she said, "This is the ladies' room." And of course, he took his cell phone, started screaming, "You're a transphobe," and wanted to talk to her manager, who is also a very senior, humble man who had started at 18 as a security guard in the university, and then he was like the manager of cleaning ladies and security guards. And he ended up saying, "Calm down, man," or something like that. So he got accused of transphobia too. This man had the courage, the gall to go to a female-only police station, because those exist for women to go report crimes. So he went there to report that he had suffered transphobia, and then it becomes, just like Vaishnavi said, a case of the state against the people who committed a crime. So we crowdfunded for lawyer money to send our lawyer north to go defend the two of them. It's 2 to 5 years jail time for racism. And I don't know if you saw a very famous case right now that we were involved in with, is a Brazilian woman, a friend of mine called Isabella, who just became the first woman who gain a refugee status as a political refugee here in the EU, because she was persecuted in Brazil so badly, because she said a man is a man. And what happened is Brazil was supposedly the worst place for trans people ever. We are apparently the country that most elects trans, like men, of course, because also they're being elected in women's quotas. But maybe 4 years back, I think it was 2020, a man who today is an MP, sort of the equivalent of an MP. At the time, he was elected for the first time as a local representative. And all the headlines in the newspapers said, "Oh, Erika Hilton, this man, is the most voted for a woman in the country. Oh, the only woman to ever make it into the top 10 voted in Brazil." And so this friend of mine that was a big feminist on internet, she commented, she says, "Oh, I'm very disappointed with the elections. No feminists were elected, and the most voted for a woman is a man." And so this man accused her of transphobia, but our public prosecutor, who was very, very co-opted, searched through her Twitter and shows 4 retweets. It wasn't even things that she had written herself, and accused her of 5 counts of racism, meaning up to 25 years in prison. And because this politician is powerful, it was all insane, because she has another case ongoing from a rape she suffered, and so a lawyer who's a friend of this politician became pro bono lawyer of her rapists, and both cases were supposed to be sigilless, like kept in secret, because she's a sexual assault victim. So, for example, the rapist cannot gain access to her address and things like that, so everything has to be kept secret. But we can see the lawyers exchanging information because things that were here suddenly appear here. It was chaos and death threats, and she couldn't get out on the street anymore. So she ended up leaving the country to be a digital nomad at first. But then at some point she came back to visit Brazil. And all the while she knew from a newspaper article that supposedly she was accused of transphobia and could get up to 25 years, but she hadn't ever received anything. And so 2 years later, when she came back to Brazil and she was leaving again for Europe, she was stopped by the police at the airport because there was something flagged, which is really strange, because she wasn't supposed to be arrested or anything. And the federal police couldn't really understand what was happening because they were not supposed to arrest her, but there was something. They took her to a small room, and she said like 8 men gathered around trying to understand what that was, and started reading that case, and were like, what? Because they have serious crimes to attend to, and they couldn't believe what they were reading. And so her plane was about to leave and all that. They called the plane. I love that story because it's such a movie. They called the plane and said, you're not leaving without that woman. They escorted her to the plane and told her, this is a political persecution. If you can, do not come back. Because we don't know. This is so strange that we even had to stop you. We don't know if the next time you come here, we're going to have to take your passport or something. And so she stayed for a year and a half here without really knowing what to do. So 3 months in Europe, then she had to get out because she doesn't have a visa, and went to Morocco. And in the end, she was very strategic about the refugee status. Now she got it, but and we were able to make it a bit of a scandal, that because she's the first Brazilian person since the military dictatorship to be recognized as being persecuted by the state, and the first person to gain that status because of being a sex realist, so it's quite insane. But she's not the only one, and she is smarter and more strategic than a lot of the other women, so we still think someone might be convicted for what she wasn't. Another thing that I think is particularly Brazilian that I haven't heard in other places is that because we have this whole history of slavery, we have affirmative actions in public universities for Black people and poorer people. And this is in law, it's inscribed in law. It was a long process with a lot of debate until all that happened. And now, most public universities have simply created quotas for trans people. Just like based on all those lies that supposedly they die at 35 and are all in prostitution, as if someone who was in prostitution was going to suddenly get into university. And for the other quotas, you either have to prove that financially you had no resources, that all your life you went to public school and not private school, or you're be Black or disabled. You have to prove something. But the trans quotas, you just self-declare. And we've been challenging that in court, MATRIA, but we're always just seen as meanies, because, if we are pro-women, why are we persecuting them? But in some universities, their quotas are even taking away quotas that exist by law. It's not extra spots. They are taking from the spots for Black people and poorer people. It's appalling, but the Black movement in Brazil is completely co-opted. They don't seem to have understood what's going on, because their law about racism now applies to white people who say they're trans. Their quotas are being taken. The racism card is very instrumentalized all the time. Like, they keep saying, I think I have heard this in English too, just like Black women weren't always considered women like everyone else because they didn't perform a certain type of femininity, now trans women. So they use that card very much in Brazil. And so, like, my organization, MATRIA, we are trying to raise awareness, to do advocacy. We're always trying to write reports. We did what was the first opinion poll in Brazil about this theme, and the population is completely against all of that. We wanted to test something, and I have presented that opinion poll now in 3 different international seminars. Because one of the things we did that no one else has done yet was test what people understood by trans woman. Because all the other polls, they either assume people know what a trans woman is and just ask, do you think a trans woman should compete in sports? Or they give a definition in the beginning. I've seen that Sex Matters does YouGov polls, and they define a trans woman is, I don't know, a man who said that. We asked people, it was our only open question, in your understanding, what is a trans woman? And 61% of people absolutely did not know. The responses we had, it was 1,100 people responded. That's a very good national poll. It's the same as presidential polls and everything. And from those, we got 220 unique responses. So you see how spread it was. And it had to do with everything. People who didn't know, who thought it was a woman, who says she's a man. People who thought it had to be with being gay, or with certain specific sexual practices, or, you know, it was very interesting to see. And so from that, we decided to ask all our questions, talking about, do you think that a man who declares as a woman should this and that, to be sure that people understood what they are answering. And even those who voted for our current president, Lula, who's considered leftist, I don't think that's left anymore, 67% of them were against policies based on self-ID, because we asked about policies that impacted women, like bathrooms, sports, prison. But still, this party seems to be completely convinced that it's a good idea to say that trans women are women. And Lula, we came from a prior government that was a far-right government with Jair Bolsonaro, who has now been convicted. Brazil is insane. I live in a state, Rio, where in the last, I think, 20 years, all the governors, except one, ended up in jail immediately after their terms. And Lula, the current president, had been jailed. Now Bolsonaro is gonna be jailed, so it's like chaos. But Bolsonaro had ended the women's ministry. Lula recreated it, but it's a ministry that mostly caters to men. And we've had meetings with the 2 ministers in those last few years, and it's a complete disaster. Just last week, it was already in Europe. Last week, there was the National Convention Conference for Policies for Women, organized by the government. And it's a very important conference, because women from every city elect representatives and then go to state conference, who elect representatives that go to this national conference, where they debate things that are supposed to be the priorities for the next years. And we sent 3 women, not MATRIA. MATRIA was prohibited from going without explanations. We had representatives to send, and we were prohibited from going. But we had partners that we had helped get there, including LGB Alliance. And once we posted that, oh, we have been cut from that, but we have allies that will represent our voices, the government had already sent them their airplane tickets, and their tickets got cancelled. Like in the middle, like 1:30 in the morning, someone had been there cancelling their tickets. But still, we fundraised, we sent them, and they were expelled once they're for transphobia. Nothing happened. Their presence was transphobic. And there are very shocking videos that we also posted of a group of like 30, 40 men going by and shouting no to transphobia, and they all stop around our 3 women shouting no to transphobia with fingers like that, but still they're the victims, and like our women got expelled from that. But at least every time things like that happen, more people seem to realize, it's still a bubble, but more people seem to realize what's going on. Let me think what else. I'm trying to think about what's a bit different in Brazil, because a lot of what's going on is exactly the same. In Brazil, we have a penal code.
Yeah.
All the crimes are there.
Yeah.
They are listed there.
Yeah.
And both our constitution and this say that people can only be charged and convicted of a crime that exists there.
Yeah.
If something becomes a crime in the future, but it wasn't a crime when you committed it, you can't be charged for it. So the really insane thing in this situation is that the Supreme Court is not the one who can create laws. In our constitution, the ones who create laws are the legislators, those who are elected by the population. And those who are elected by the population in Brazil are very conservative, because it's a very conservative country. So no law would ever go through about anything trans. It all came in other ways. But and a lot of it came through the Supreme Court. They are abusing their power. It's like, it's very clear.
They can't be challenged at all. They can't be challenged.
No, because they are like, we are trying to challenge them, but I mean, we're challenging them to themselves.
Exactly.
And so yes, they have just decided this because a political party went to them saying that there's an omission, a legislative omission, that there should be a law that would criminalize homo-transphobia. I hate that expression they invented, because it's like, it has nothing to do one thing with the other. And so the Supreme Court accepted that and said, yes, you're right. And as long as the legislators do not pass a law, then we decide that in this country, homo-transphobia should be equated to the crime of racism. So the same thing, like everything that's listed as racism and penalties and everything will apply to homo-transphobia, because they said it's a form of social racism. No sense in it at all. And as I said, racism is a very serious offense in Brazil. And now women, as I said, we help Black women being accused of, under the law of racism, by white men in a dress, saying that they were socially racist to them because they pointed out that they were a man. I haven't seen any other country in this situation where you really can end up going to jail because of that. It's very complicated, and the thing is, the Supreme Court is sitting on, I'm not sure I will know the word for it in English, but when they made that decision, it was challenged by 2 different groups. One of them being the state itself, like the general attorney at the time. And the general attorney said the exact same things that we do. The Supreme Court should not be creating a law. The Supreme Court did not define what transphobia would be. There isn't a list saying this and this and this and this constitutes transphobia. That's why we get accused, anything we say, we get accused of transphobia, because it doesn't say what it is. This can infringe on freedom of speech, etc. this can pose a problem for some spaces that should be separated. But they say everything, it's perfect. And again, I will lack the vocabulary for this, but as long as the Supreme Court hasn't judged those challenges, it's like their decision isn't final, completely final. And for us, it's very clear that it's been years, and they have never gone back to judge that.
Really?
Because I think they want this to, because it's been used by judges and everyone, even though none of it makes sense, and I think everyone's comfortable with that situation. So this has been sitting there. We are sort of trying to pressure for them to judge that, especially what the general attorney said, but there's not much we can do. We are doing what we can, but we have a case now about prisons, because well, any man can just, as I said, self-declare as a woman. Doesn't matter the crime he committed, doesn't matter when, doesn't matter anything. Especially I don't know why, but especially in the capital, Brasilia, there are over 90 men right now in the women's prison. And we are working very closely with the female agents in the prison, who are going absolutely insane because they say the prison wasn't prepared. They are a completely different profile. They are violent, they don't respect them, and it's chaotic because there's a law in Brazil that men cannot work inside female prisons because there was so much abuse, sexual abuse. But now the female agents, they have to keep asking the men to come to deal with those who have self-declared trans, because and they had never had riots or anything, and now it's happening because of those men. They're violent men. And then they sort of leaked to us a letter that a few female inmates wrote, and they say that even though they are not sharing cells, because in Brasilia they have the space to separate them, but they share. They see each other, and when they are sunbathing, they see each other. And the women say that they keep like showing their genitals and shouting at them. Every single day, they are causing problems, and then the whole prison has to stop to deal with their problems. Meaning, the women don't get to sunbathe or do things that they should be doing because there's no one to accompany them. And the judge who is responsible for prisons in Brasilia, she knows about this, because I know from the women who work in the prison that they sent a report. And when we asked her for a meeting and said we want to talk about all that, she said there has never been any issue, and if the female officers are having a problem, they need to take classes on how to deal with the trans prisoners. But so we have presented a case in the Supreme Court, because even though there's already this decision that allows any man to self-declare to the female prison, the trans activists want more. Of course they do. Because the decision says that the judge has the final say. It has never been used to say no to anyone, because every time they say no, there's a huge scandal. Oh my God, the human rights of trans, and it gets undone. But they don't want this to exist, this provision, so that no judge can say anything, that if the person self-declared, they self-declare, and also that the man can choose if they want to share a cell. Because today, the decision doesn't say they can share a cell, even though we know in some prisons that has happened, and we know of pregnancy cases. But it's very complicated because everyone comes to us telling stories, but then no one wants to really come forward with the proofs. We know that the profile of women in prison is very different from
Like
the
here,
profile
same
of
here.
men.
Yeah.
It's a lot of women who were in lower ranks of drug trafficking in Brazil, usually through the husbands and things like that. We know that absolutely no one visits women in prison. Like, no one. The men, they get even famous sometimes. Like they start receiving letters from random women who wants to date them. But the women got completely abandoned by everyone. So it's already very hard. Most of them have been victims of sexual assault. We have those statistics. And then they find themselves with men. And the thing is that the prison has to become higher and higher security because there are men there. So before they were freer inside there. The officers tell us that no one ever thought about running away. Like the women, they behave very differently in a prison. There isn't like real violence or threat of running away. And then when the men come, everything escalates security-wise, and that affects the women too. So anyway, this trans activist group is asking for those two things. We know now from experience that submitting an amicus brief, even though we do that every time, doesn't guarantee that we will be heard. So what we did was we submitted another case because we knew they would be attached to each other because they're the same subject, even though they're asking for the opposite things, that they would have to run together. And so since we are an active part of one, we would have to be heard. But so what we are saying is that man and female prisons is in the Constitution, which it is, because it's written clearly in our Constitution that people, that like prisons will be separated by sex. Simple as that. But the problem is we all know that sex has been reinterpreted. And so, for example, I was talking about female quotas in politics and how in Brazil, like people haven't heard here, but Brazil is apparently the country that most elect trans people in politics. We have a lot of
But they're all men.
Those very all men, of course. They're all very sexualized men. A woman politician would never get away with the way they dress and behave and any of it. And they're all using the female quotas, and it's something that happened in the exact same year. We had a law that we call the election law that says that no sex can be less than 30% of candidates of a party. Of course, it's only ever applied to women because the minority of it. And for many years this law existed, but the parties, they had fake women candidates. Put someone who would never, they didn't put any money in it, any advertisement, publicity, I don't know how to say that, campaign. They didn't campaign for the women who sometimes got 0 votes. She didn't even vote for herself. So finally, it was decided that 30% of the fund, because there's public funding for parties in Brazil. I don't know how it is in other countries, but there's public funding that goes into parties and in their campaigns. And so it was decided that 30% of the funding had to go to 30% of women candidates. In the exact same year this was decided, it was also decided by justice that where it says sex in this law, it should be read gender. And what happened was that immediately in the next election, the most voted for woman in the story I was telling was a man. In São Paulo, the most voted for woman was a man in Belo Horizonte, and so it started. And every election in Brazil, we have a lot of questioning around those who declare themselves to be black, because there are also quotas for black candidates. And it's always a scandal, oh, so-and-so isn't black. And it's a very hard thing to judge in Brazil, I'm being very honest, because in Brazil, it's very different from the United States, where they think that if you have 1 drop of black blood, you're black. In Brazil, it never worked like that, because it's more of, if you look black, you're considered black. If you look white, you're considered white. It doesn't really matter if someone in your family was black and white. And there was a lot of mix in Brazil, really was. So you look in Brazil, you see like,
Yeah.
a whole spectrum.
Yeah.
So it's kind of hard to judge in Brazil where it starts and where it ends, and if you can define someone as black or not. So sometimes there are candidates that are clearly lying, but it's not always the case. And there's a big debate. Oh, so-and-so declared for election. Blah, blah, blah. About a man declaring that he's a woman? No.
No, what do you mean?
No
No
arguments,
debate.
no debate. Like, perfectly within his right to do so.
I was just wondering if the social racism is such a big thing, how would that then apply, let's say, like for children under 18, let's say in a school, if they said something like, what, like, you're not a girl, like, what would the consequences of that kind of stuff be?
We've had kids expelled from school, bullied, expelled from school. Let's talk about minors, what's going on, because there's recent things going on. Again, no laws about anything in Brazil. This came about from the medicine council, like the medical bodies. So they had a previous resolution where they said that puberty blockers were okay, that cross-sex hormones could be done at 16 and surgeries at 18. So this was going on, and our public system was doing that. Now they changed the resolution just this year. They came up with a new one mentioning caste review and everything. And so no puberty blockers, no hormones under 18, and what they called sterilizing surgeries after 21. So breast chopping at 18, yeah. And they did the 21 because in Brazilian law, if a woman wants, how do you say when you get your uterus out, or a hysterectomy? A woman who wants a hysterectomy in Brazil, she can do it after 21. That is very recent, because it used to be a much higher age with husband approval. If you've had children, very recently, like maybe 2 years ago, that this law changed. So they have a good basis. Like, we're equating the ages of a hysterectomy to what applies to everyone. This is being challenged in the Supreme Court by the insane trans activists who say that the human rights of a kid to get sterilized. We are, of course, submitted amicus briefs to that, and it's ongoing, but we're quite hopeful about that one, that this will stand. The general attorney and all that, all those who have already manifested in the case have said that no, the resolution is based on good research and everything. So this is a great win that we hope will stand, but at the same time, I don't know how it is elsewhere, but we have heard something we didn't know, because I'm finding things out every day, that you can buy over-the-counter puberty blockers.
Oh.
Yes. So there were mothers and parents saying, we are just gonna keep doing it on our own. And then we had a meeting with the Medicine Council. We asked for a meeting, and we mentioned that. We said, look, can't you make this like harder to buy? And they were like, it's more complicated, because it's they can recommend that the drug, federal drug, I don't know. I think it's
a separate thing. Right.
Yeah, it's a separate thing that they can recommend that they change how this works, but we will try. We have now a detransitioners group in MATRIA. We have many groups. We have the group of mothers of kids who think they're trans. this has been a very important group that has had a lot of impact, because I think, well, not only is it good for the mothers who are in despair, in complete despair, their lives are hell, it's like a very heavy situation, and they have a WhatsApp group, so it's really good, but we meet every 2 weeks and we bring psychologists to talk to them, or we bring the transitioners to talk to them. We also help them find therapists who are not affirming for their kids. And we have already seen some impacts of some of them saying after a few months how their kids are doing better. So that's very good. But we have our detransitioners group, and all of the women in the group, they took testosterone on their own.
Yeah.
They didn't even go to anyone. And a very crazy thing is that all except one, there's only one guy who hadn't changed his documents. All the other changed because it was very easy, and now they can't change back. It's been over like a year for most of them, and it's not easy now to change back. They have to have a lawyer, to ask a court, and then there's one of them who's going through that process, and she said that the judge has twice gone back to ask, are you sure? Like, no one asked anything when they decided to change to the wrong sex. And the girl we have that is in the worst situation, that her health is ruined. She has arthritis everywhere, and she's very young. And she's a chef in a kitchen, and there are long periods of time when she can't work because she can't stand for long hours because she has pain. She wants to be a public servant, and there are exams you have to take for that. It's the only entry into public service in Brazil. And her document says she's a woman, so she would have to prove that she did the mandatory military service, or not necessarily that she did it, but that she presented herself and was exempted, or and she didn't do that. And she can't change back her documents. It's been a long time, so her whole life is now blocked because of that. But I mean, I went into detransitioners to say that yes, people will still do testosterone and things like that on their own, because apparently it's easy to get. And also when we ask the medicine council about, okay, what's going to happen to doctors who still transition kids, and they said it all depends on people accusing them, like saying this has been going on, and then proving, and then, so we know nothing's perfect, but it's a step that at least it's said this is not good, and this should not be done. But they are up in arms in Brazil about this whole thing, and the media is completely captured. There isn't a single article on how it's a good decision, and like nothing. It's all about the human rights of the poor trans kids. I think one of the only things that impacts Brazil is public opinion abroad, international opinion. Our government is very concerned about international opinion. So we are always trying to get, because in Brazil it's impossible, we're never getting media or anything, and we're always trying to get someone abroad to talk about things and see if it makes them a little ashamed of what's going on. So this is one that we managed, at least on Twitter, to get out. It's a woman we helped. Every time we see someone being attacked, I become detective until I reach that woman and say, do you need help? And sometimes just telling them you're not crazy, you didn't do anything and you're not wrong, that already helps them a lot. So in this case, I spent a whole morning until I found this woman of videos that were circulating of a woman and her daughter being expelled from this huge theater, like 800 people seeing the musical Wicked, and everyone chanting no to transphobia to them. And what happened was, she was in line to get popcorn before the show, and there was a couple just before her, in something was happening, some sort of conflict. She wasn't involved in that conflict. And when the couple left, she asked other people in line, like, but what was the problem? Because apparently someone had cut in line. Who was in line? Was it the man or the woman? She was talking about the couple. She even referred to the trans woman as woman. She just had seen the long hair. And so the man, who thinks he's a woman, turned, thinking that when she said, was it the man or that the man, she was calling him a man, which she hadn't, because she hadn't even seen who it was. And so started like screaming at her, and she was like, I'm gonna ignore this, and just went with her daughter to sit in her place with her popcorn, like, what the hell is going on? And so this man, who's an influencer, who lives from making scandals about, being trans and persecuted, called production, started screaming, said that the musical couldn't start with those transphobes there. And in the end, seriously, they got the whole theater chanting for them to leave and that they were transphobes, like that. It was very scary, because if they had torches, they would have burned the witch.
Eu fui vítima de transfobia por aquela mulher. Ela me chamou de homem. Tira, 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 tira.
Vocês vão tirar? Vocês não vão tirar? Vai aprender pra bem ou por mal quando vem sociedade, com a diversidade, cara. Obrigado, teatro. Obrigado. Obrigado. Parabéns pra você. Valeu. Obrigado mesmo. Obrigado.
Was a 10-year-old girl whose dream was to go watch Wicked, and she was crying her eyes out. And so in the end, they left because it was impossible, and the production was saying that they had to leave. Wow. And the director came to ask forgiveness to everyone and no to transphobia. And then all the actors were posting online, a terrible thing happened today, and what about this poor girl raised by this transphobe of her mother? The thing took, and like all the newspapers in Brazil reported that as a thing. No one reached out to the woman, no one heard what happened, no one. Now she's suing. I hope she has success in suing this man. But it was chaos, and the images are very shocking, because it's really like burn the witch.
It's really brilliant. Thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.